The line between cooperation and competition is surprisingly thin. As an example, think about what happens in Thanksgiving. We have Black Friday sales here in the United States that really trigger the holiday season, and sometimes you see huge crowds mob stores in anticipation of a great sale. So outside of these stores, here's one mob that was mobbing a store. People often end up in fistfights. One one particularly sad occasion when Black Friday really took on a different term was in 2008 in upstate New York. There was a crowd of people that had gathered outside of a store. They were literally chanting, "Tear the doors down, tear the doors down," eager to get into this store. Well, the employees had formed a human chain trying to hold the shoppers back. And as the customers stormed into this store, they literally took the doors off the hinges and they ended up trampling Jay Ditmar to death. Now, many of the employees end up scampering up onto vending machines trying to get out of the way. People were injured and in one case killed. Now, what's ironic here is that the Thanksgiving holiday celebrates cooperation. We think about the historic cooperation between the early American settlers and the Native American Indians. And here we celebrate this time of family and cooperation. And yet we juxtapose this with these sales and often a big mad rush that creates a lot of conflict. And this occasion in 2008 and that early photo that I showed you before is not an isolated incident. We routinely see this idea of holiday spirit. Here, this Huffington Post headline, "Shootings, Stabbings, and Brawls." And then here, in other cases, people actually stealing from each other, trying to get the best deals. So what I want to think about is how we navigate this tension. What pushes us from cooperation to competition or from competition to cooperation? And this Thanksgiving example, we have the cooperative meal and then this competitive dash for these holiday sales. But I think a more dramatic example of a shift from competition to cooperation is represented in the relationship between the United States and Japan. As we all know, the conflict in World War II was intense. Here, this is a photo of firebombing in 1941. We had intense conflict. The United States firebombed 67 Japanese cities, in addition to dropping 2 atomic bombs, culminating in 1945, and the Japanese ultimately surrendered. So the conflict between the United States and Japan could not have been more intense. And yet, immediately after that conflict, there was a pivot to cooperation. And General MacArthur, when they took over in Japan, shifted immediately to cooperation, made it illegal for any American to strike a Japanese person, even made it illegal for Americans to eat Japanese food because there's such a food shortage on Japan. Americans who were there could only eat the American rations. Now, we moved forward. We ended up cooperating, rebuilding factories. And here you see this cooperation through the 1950s, culminating in this Declaration of Cooperation signed in 1960. And today, you'd be hard-pressed to find citizens that are more pro-U.S. than those in Japan. So we see this remarkable shift from competition to cooperation. Now, this happens not just on the global stage, not just in terms of shopping malls, but it happens in our most intimate relationships. We think about parenting. Parenting, you can't be more intimately cooperative with someone other than your partner, and think about the cooperation that goes into raising a child. And yet, even with raising a child, there's competition. There's competition with your spouse of who's going to sleep, who's going to change or feed the baby. And we have competition even within our most intensely cooperative relationships. So the idea is that we shift between cooperation and competition. And we often balance cooperation and competition even in our most intense relationships. Now, think about siblings. So with siblings, we often think about sibling love, but at the same time, we think about sibling rivalry. Now, here's one example of sibling love. We think about it with humans, but it turns out the ground squirrel teaches us something really important about siblings. Ground squirrels are actually incredibly altruistic. When a predator is nearby, say a bird overhead or another large animal, ground squirrels will screech to warn others to get out of the way. Now, by screeching, they're drawing attention to themselves. It puts them at risk. It makes them vulnerable to some attack. As scholars have looked at the volume with which ground squirrels screech, and it turns out they screech loudest when a predator is near their sibling. So we see sibling love even among ground squirrels. And so we have this incredible relationship with our siblings, and yet sibling rivalry can be incredibly intense. These are our closest friends and also sometimes our closest rivals as we compete for things like parental attention and investment. For twins, it starts particularly early. Even in the womb, twins start competing for resources. Now, more generally, we think about collaborating at work. We need to collaborate with our colleagues at work to accomplish joint goals. But then we're also competing for things like recognition, promotion, and raises. So both at home and at work, we're both cooperating and competing, and we need to figure out how to manage this tension and navigate this balance. So the idea is that we're competing and cooperating all the time, and often within the same relationships at the same time.